Okay, JB, obviously we are in the middle of a little bit of a project here. What's going on in the diagnosis and what's happened here?
This is a Factory 5 Cobra replica that was built quite a few years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it was built, but generally speaking, they've been around a long time. They do a pretty good job of putting things together, making them practical, making them usable, and you don't hear a lot of whining about Factory 5 cars. I'm not an expert on them, but clearly, from what I've seen, they do a pretty good job of putting the cars together. This car was in an accident. It hit the right front. And the question here is, how do we assess the damage? Because fiberglass, unlike metal, does not deform and stay in that attitude. It actually deforms and then returns to its original position. Okay. So that's good, but it also leaves, generally speaking, the gel coat and the primer underneath the paint is cracked, and we can see evidence of that in this particular body. If you look right in this area right in here, you'll see an area that is where the force pushed the nose and bent it up, and then because the primer and the gel coat is brittle, it cracked right along that area.
Right.
So even though it's not really evident until you actually look at it, we're probably going to have to go in and repair that, because that's just going to get worse over time.
Okay.
So we're going to have to remove the paint, remove the gel coat probably, and to see how extensive the damage is. We know that this was shattered, and we've reconstructed this with a combination of fiberglass mat and filler, and always want to use mat. This is a perfect example where you do not use Bondo. Bondo is brittle. It forms really easily. It's not, but it also is susceptible to cracking in the future, especially out here where you're right out at the edge of the car. So we don't really want to use that, except in maybe a tiny bit at the very end. And in this case, it's so small, we won't use any Bondo at all. We'll use a filler primer. We'll reshape this, get it pretty much the shape it's going to be, and then we'll use just actually brush on some catalyzed filler primer, sand that down, and then sand up into the fender to make the new primer and the new paint fade into the fender.
So you're going to be able to blend it in with
the existing paint, because we got the whole side of the car is one continuous piece. So we don't want to have to paint the whole side of the car if we can avoid it. So we're going to try and blend it, and we're going to do a process called shading, where we're going to take this blue color. First of all, we'll have it matched from an actual example on the car. We'll check it, make sure it's correct, and then when the body work is done, then we're going to actually terminate it over a very long distance, and then we're going to start adding clear as we go along, so that as the transition happens, the eye is unable to pick up the difference between the new paint and the old paint.
Okay.
Because we don't want that. We don't want a line. We don't want a shaded area. We want it to terminate gradually through the length of the fender in this case, so that we're not able to see the transition.
Okay.
And after we sand all this area out and get these cracks out of this, we got a crack straight across here. We got one that's a radial crack up here.
Yeah.
Once we strip that down, we'll see how deep the damage goes, and we'll just completely remove that area and replace it. Again, we want to use something that's stable. We don't want to use just lacquer primer or something, or Bondo. We want to use something that's going to remain intact for a long time.
What I'm hearing is, don't put Bondo on your fiberglass car.
It really is a really bad idea, especially since you can buy fiberglass mat and cloth at Home Depot. I mean, there's no reason that you cannot find it in almost anywhere. So there's no excuse for grabbing Bondo and filling cracks. They're just going to come back. The Bondo is brittle. It's going to draw and crack and just go south on you sometime in the near future. So it's a really bad idea to use any Bondo on a fiberglass car. Yeah.
Now, as far as the replacement parts go, it looks like the kind of the grill ring.
Right. Well, you can see this is an indication of how much impact it took. So
Yeah,
it pretty much
folded that up.
destroyed that.
Yeah.
The customer brought in a new one. I don't know if we have the mating plastic ring that goes on the back of the headlight. We really don't know how much this is available. The car was built a number of years ago, so if Factory 5 is able, then we'll get them to provide parts for it potentially, unless if we can't source it locally. But you can see from the bumper that it pretty well tore it up pretty good. So you can see where the force hit it, bent it. The customer went ahead and bought another one instead of trying to straighten this one and plate it, which was a really smart idea because that could have been really expensive and very time consuming. So that's another thing to consider. Do you replace or do you fix? In the case of chrome, if you can go out and buy another one of these for reasonable, it makes no sense to try and straighten this and then replate it and put it back on. You could be waiting months for that to all happen. So he went out and bought the parts, thankfully, from Factory 5, and so now we just put that stuff back on. And it also gives us an opportunity to see how this fits. If this thing is at a skew because the car got impacted in this direction, then that's what Tony's doing now. He's mocking up the new bumper to see how it fits relative to the car. Does it fit the same on the left as it does on the right? And if that's the case, then we're good to go. If it doesn't, then we may have some interior damage. That means we're going to have to change maybe the mount. Again, if you imagine a wave of force going through this car, that's kind of what happens in an impact. And what was damaged is sometimes very difficult to identify. So you have to kind of really study it closely, look for damage further up from behind the actual point of impact, so that as that force is transferred, it's going to tear up other things. And so we're going to get a car up in the air. We're going to be looking at all the things underneath to make sure that something else isn't damaged, because the car sits almost flat on the ground, so it's very difficult to analyze from the point of view of the customer, because all he can do is see what he sees. And he's been doing a really good job of sourcing that before he brought it in, which is good. It's because now we have the new bumper to mock up. We can see how it relates. We can see if the other damage is potentially there. And sometimes it's just a matter of the factory not doing a perfect job. And then we're going to be in charge of remedying that. But I don't see anything other than the front of the nose where the damage occurred. And he's driven the car and doesn't have any apparent steering problems or that sort. But we'll be looking at all that to make sure that wasn't damaged in the process. Because if the steering is broken on this thing, it's very, very dangerous. So we're going to have to go through all of that and make sure that something isn't broken and getting ready to fall off of it.
All right, well, I'm just going to do a quick walk-around tour of this vehicle. So people can see what a Factory 5 model kind of looks like, feels like. Looks like it actually has real knockoff wheels, from what I can tell. So that's cool.
They're probably pin drive.
Yeah, that part I would not have any idea. Obviously, they've got kind of the flavor of the original dash, but certainly
a lot of it's very much like an original.
But they are obviously more modern.
The seats are obviously a modern type of seat. More of a racing style seat.
With obviously, you have to have a serious sound system to overcome the noise of the motor, right?
Yes. An onboard musician would be a good idea. These things are very loud and
very hefty.
Well, that's a kind of a tribute to the cars that were raced by Carroll Shelby in actually, this is one of the trademarks of one of the race cars.
It feels like a racing.
Because you can pop this off, you can fill it with fuel, put it right back on, and he's out and he's gone. Instead of messing
just
around.
press it down and
it's right over here where it's accessible to the crew. So that's why it's located in that locale.
Oh, that's cool. And again,
it's got the roll bars. If you ever flip one of these things, believe me, you will need roll bars. There's not much else there to protect you. So that was a good idea. And of course, you can see that it has really, really wide tires on it, because these things have a habit of being tail happy, meaning that they oversteer and they will get away from you if you're not careful. And that tire in the rear prevents a lot of that.
And of course the side pipes, those are functional. Those are not just for show.
Yes.
Very nice. Very nice. Give a feel for it. Here's what the driver's seeing right there. Very cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to see this thing finished when you guys get it done. I mean, obviously it's a minor repair, but at the same time, you know what? When a car like this is clearly have some damage, you just don't want it to stay like that.
No.
Oh, we're going to pop the hood real quick. Okay, so it
This
has
is a
the
4.6.
Mustang dual overhead cam, 32 valve, 4.6 liter V8.
Right. It's a modern engine, and you can see it pretty much fills the engine compartment.
Yeah, but it feels like it fits pretty well. Like it doesn't seem crazy. It's filling.
Yeah, you have access to a lot of things, and they've done a pretty good job of fitting a 5-pound object into an area where a 3-pound object should have gone. But see how much big gap over here and no gap over there? It's like it's this way. See the problem?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, from this angle, I can
we're
see
not
the
gonna
difference.
Spend hours and hours and hours, but here's the problem. Right across. Yo tengo miedo que es cuando sí se cabró esto.